everyone. Hello. Sorry, do you mind? Hello, welcome to Segue. I'm Stella, and this is the 4th event in our series, which I curated alongside Jay Sanders. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from artists, poets, and writers Lola Sinreich and Mauss, both who imbue language with a protracted visuality informed by their deep engagement with art objects and the worlds in which they exist. I will begin by introducing Lola, and after she reads, Jay will introduce Nick. Lola Sinreich is a poet and arts worker in New York City who has been composing brief and vivid arrangements of words over the past decade. Coming from a background in visual art and video editing, her poems deal with notions of time and memory drawn from her study of filmic structure and her own biography, particularly her recent experience with motherhood and as a caregiver to a parent with Alzheimer's. Across her work, she inflects the prosaic details of contemporary life with a pastoral sensibility, imprinting information as soft and bright images that are made concrete through the frankness of their syntactic delivery. For instance, the ring of a metal trash can stamped on cement appears like a drawing of the sun's rays. A doorstop recalls a horse's hoof, and trash bags taped over the tops of street lamps envelop the form as outer space surrounds a satellite. These types of impressionistic juxtapositions invite things or ideas thought to be far away or outside into the present picture. A keen interest in the effect of flattening persists across Lola's poetry, clearly informed by the process of editing. As with a photo that compresses the distance between all that is perceivable, or a clip that collapses multiple video, audio, or effects layers onto one cohesive track, she brings information close to us as a discrete image within a compact timeline. In a poem titled Stationary, she writes, "Even though I feel we're stationary, and it's the scenery that's moving, frame by frame, of brown land and faces blurring, I'll say goodbye to the cruise ship, the little dog in the porthole, an entire bobbing neighborhood that's right now disappearing along with the port behind, while ahead a postcard of a place that waits, so flattened I fear it won't accept us." All the particularities of a given scene, here a seaside setting and the people and things moving within it, coalesce into a single plane. But even in this captured moment, stilled by her verse, evidence of life exists in the blur, as she calls it. The blur threatens to muddy events and emotions that tantalize the promise of wholeness, even as they recede. But what is left in this series of fragmented phrases can be carried like a small memento, a shorthand device used to recall the most essential qualities of an experience. Today, Lola will read a selection of poems written recently and some for this occasion. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming her. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you for coming. Frame story. A flick of her foot makes the cat scatter past the broken bookshelf, empty bird cage, the rocking chair still swaying on its bent feet. In the bath, the drain is covered with clumped hairs. By the door, wet boots make their own puddles. Cardboard and newspapers are nested, bound with clear tape. Under the bed, dust shifts with my steps. The sound of drawers opening and closing is hidden by the dishwasher, ringing its bells. In a moment, I'll slide down the hallway, slow and heavy. She doesn't know I have another home. I carry it with me, like a snail. "11. She circled the field, battling the wind. shielding her eyes from the sun, sick to her stomach weeping, and watching herself weep from a distance. And as she cried, the grass cried too. It was morning, it was covered in dew, and she was alone in the way that children are alone, which is not alone, so alive to the bugs and leaves and the world always having a nook to climb in. But see, she was on the cusp of 11, so she saw the nooks but couldn't quite fit and hated feeling so big and the wrong shape. So she cried for that too, out in the golden field, with the horses in the distance indifferent, their tails swishing and shaking like wild, defiant metronomes. Melodrama. I was a woman with grown children. They came over sometimes to bring me presents, napkins, candles, a TV set to keep me company, but I'd never turn it on, just use it as a mirror. My husband died a long time ago, so when you came to trim my tree, I was happy to talk and brought you lemonade. You know all about trees. I think your knowledge makes you such a gentle person. You care for my maple with patience, wearing your red plaid jacket, your hair dyed dark auburn. We were friends before we were lovers, before you took me in front of the window and kissed me, with the snow falling outside and the deer watching. In the ground, the plants were hibernating, and we hibernated in your cabin. My children thought I was crazy, that I should stay in my brightly lit house. Sometimes I was scared too, because I knew this was a melodrama, which means something bad will happen. And then it did. I left for no reason. Fear, maybe. That TV didn't care if I came home. Under snow, there's ice, and you were so sad and distracted that as you were collecting wood, you slipped and fell off a cliff into the snow. I found you there. Your body left its imprint long after I came to collect you. Cast. It took some time, but I've cast her to play me perfectly. It wasn't hard. There's not much to say, not much to memorize, but she needed to look the part. What I didn't predict was that they would like her better. She's easier to be around, more comfortable in her own skin. Never mind she looks nothing like me. Never mind I'm the one telling her what to do, spending my days thinking of things for her to say. And it's harder since she can't smile. No one's even paying attention. Her hair is lighter than mine, her teeth more crooked. She always wants more food, more love, more words. Do you think she'll get them? Night version. He placed clues around the house, but she chose not to look. Cracked doors slashed shadows on slanted ceilings. Paint loosened and fell in flakes. In black and white, she wore red lipstick, before the rose bush retired, before change slipped through the torn pockets of his plaid jacket. Now the head of the corn broom hides soil and pennies. At dawn, the man-made lake reflects a hammered sun or moon, and the sky is for a moment the underexposed blue of night scenes in old movies filmed during the day. She wakes to the sound of the neighbor's radio. Her socks sweep a path from bed to window, and through that cramped pane of glass, she watches the field. She listens. Stationary. Even though I feel we're stationary, and it's the scenery that's moving, frame by frame of brown land and faces blurring, I'll say goodbye to the cruise ship, the little dog in the porthole, an entire bobbing neighborhood that's right now disappearing, along with the port behind, while ahead a postcard of a place waits, so flattened I fear it won't accept us. And below in the water, a lone jellyfish brings me to that afternoon when we walked on the beach, and you pointed to the jellyfish, said it was dead, and I thought how I wouldn't have known if you hadn't told me, and instead would have just thought that it was waiting for the tide to come in and take it home. From afar. The metal trash can leaves a ring, like a drawing of the sun's rays on the cement. I see the shadows a tree makes there also, patterned and unpatterned. A pigeon changes pace, a padlock clicks shut. The sewer grate traps leaves in its maze. The tree is dressed in a no trespassing sign, and I hear the truck whisper to me, "You have the patience of a god." But it's not the truck. It's the woman behind me, trying to comfort her friend. The difference between advice and comfort: don't forget to buckle your seatbelt, brush your teeth, break the fourth wall. The door stopper comes down, like a small hoof inside the cluttered surveying office in my mind. In a glass window, condensation replaces curtains. A dent in a cab door is the size of my knee. If we lie down and look up from below the picnic table, through slats we'll see blue strips of sky and can forget about the clouds elsewhere. Trash bags are taped over the tops of the streetlights, the way outer space surrounds the satellite, where that lonely woman lives, the one that went up 30 years ago to watch us from afar. While I was away, clouds of dust covered the carpet. Blankets unfolded themselves. The elevator, empty, opened and closed 100 times. Food rotted in the refrigerator, light bulbs hummed. The television played the same cul-de-sac of commercials and news. It rained, and outside the sidewalk, once wet, could never dry. The photo album melted. All the pages stuck together. The piano played one note, then retired forever. All the clothes became dirty, then clean again. 2 birds landed on your ledge to coo and groom each other, their teeny beaks tapping each other clean. In the hour that I was away, the season changed, from fall to spring. The floor tiles arranged themselves into new patterns. Out of nowhere, flowers appeared on your dresser. You blinked, they were loose petals, yellow dust, a mess. Questions pooled all around you, then drained like water from the drum of a washing machine. The small crack in the wall became a deep, deep gash. The counter covered itself with crumbs. The siren blared for years straight. You covered your ears and wondered where I was. Wasn't I coming? Wasn't I supposed to come today to close the window, dampen the noise? Two. My daughter rolls on the floor, drapes herself like a sweater on the couch, her whole torso over the seat of the chair, kneads my chest by turning her head back and forth. She needs to touch to know. She draws a line in the dusty window. When she says her age, she holds up one finger on each hand. Her hands are the size of my ears. Her whole body fits between my legs. When a stranger walks too close, she rushes there, wants to press herself back into one body. She copies my body, learns how to use her mouth to make words, chew food, how to walk, wear clothes. From the beginning, she copied, her heartbeat chasing after my heartbeat. I thought that carrying her, I would feel heavy. It felt like floating in space, or at least how I imagine floating in space to feel, moving without moving, watching from a distance our old world. On the rug she plays now, makes her messy constellations. Here, she says, and hands me a rice cake she's chewed into the shape of a mountain. Here, a wooden clothespin, like her 2 outstretched arms. Tuesday. She wakes up in the rocking chair again. She drinks air from a cup with her name on it. She has a box of cornflakes. It won't open. She has a box of diapers. It won't open. And there's no baby anyways. She has a book. It's full of blank pages. She has a duck that's enormous, like the size of a horse. She doesn't know how it got here. She yells out, but he doesn't answer. His voice is in the other room, taking notes. She finds him on the plaid couch and sits beside him. She feels the weather, but only a little. It's fall or winter now. Sometimes it's dark for what seems like weeks. There's no clock in the house. She wants to move his hand to her face, her shoulder, her waist, but she can't even move her own hand. Her whole arm is stiff. Does she like the missing wall? She can't decide. She doesn't know what makes the sun rise. She doesn't know what color the house is painted. She doesn't know where the music comes from, but it's playing now. It's playing the piano badly. Explaining the ending. She wants to know why the film ends on a cloudy day, a giant speaker dangling from a crane outside her window, so I try to explain. Because the speaker, like the couch, was too big to fit through the door. Because it was a gift, and a gift can be a burden. Because when it's finally inside, it will play music, voices and instruments together, and this was supposed to be a love story. Because anyone asked to imagine a sky will see it differently. And threatening, so high up, also holy, it's fascinating to watch a crane move anything, which is why we sit sometimes for hours by the landfill, watching curled up pieces of metal plunk into different piles, thinking, is this what my brain does? Maybe your brain too? Blue. The present you gave me is blue, a photo tinted blue. A blue horse idles a farmhouse amidst blue. Smoke is blue, earth blue. Not blue as it can be sometimes, not navy or baby. This is turquoise. Maybe a sea somewhere is this color. I've never seen it. In my room, a fan sits on the chair, looks out the window, reflects the strip of sunlight leaking in through the shades. I'd like to sit on this couch forever, wait until the frame expands so I can stroll, blade in hand, with the fan, into our beautiful blue future. That's the last one. The beginning. It starts with a doorway, a shadow, a song. It starts when the words come out as whispers, when you're so close you can finally hear them. It starts with a chime, a bell, a beep, a beep, a beep, in a rainstorm, on top of a mountain, in the middle of the book. It starts as I'm leaving, my wet boot prints, you hunched over, gray hair trailing down your back. It starts in the ground-up stones of the earth, in the terroir. It starts with the gray scar hidden under my pant leg. My grandmother, mother. It starts and then it started, right here in the bedroom by the window. It starts with a leap forward, celluloid, developer, smell of onions, with an inhale, an exhale, an emptying out, with a voice, a scrap of dialogue, a whistle, then a rustle, an umbrella popping open, somewhere deep inside. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Lola. Just a quick note to our virtual viewers, you can donate to the reading through Segwe's Venmo, and all the proceeds go to the readers. It's my great pleasure to introduce Nick Mauss. Nick Mauss has developed a practice that moves at the interstices of established histories of art. Drawing is at its core, but not drawing as a fixed medium. For Mauss, drawing is a method, a way of thinking that migrates across materials, formats, and spaces. The line expands into reverse-painted glass, ceramics, textiles, sculpture, performance, writing, and perhaps most crucially, the exhibition itself. There's a remarkable porosity to his work. The boundaries between artist, curator, and writer dissolve, as each role activates the other. Exhibitions aren't simply containers for artworks. they're intrinsic to his practice. He uses institutions not to illustrate a thesis, but to refract history, to bring overlooked archives into new constellations, to rupture established genealogies, and to propose alternate lineages. I had the privilege of working with Nick during the 2012 Whitney Biennial. He reconstructed entirely in velvet and applique an antechamber originally designed in 1939 by Christian Berard for Guerlain in Paris. Installed within the biennial, this fragment of decorative modernism disrupted the expected logic of a contemporary exhibition and initiated a spatial and psychological shift. Around and within it, Mauss curated works from the Whitney's collection, staging a counter-history where decorative arts, fashion, theater, and painting coexisted without hierarchy. This impulse deepened, again at the Whitney, in Transmissions, his exhibition exploring the relationship between modernist ballet and the avant-garde visual arts in early and mid-century New York. There he layered his own works with archival materials, film, photography, paintings, sculptures, drawings, and daily performances by dancers, treating the museum itself as performative, activating pre-queer histories and rethinking how bodies, desire, and representation circulate through art forms and institutions. Mauss's work unfolds with remarkable precision. It attends to the underdrawing, the rehearsal, the image just before it fully coheres. In ceramics made through quasi-blind processes, or in mirror paintings that entangle the viewer in layered time, images appear belatedly, sometimes in reverse or in negative. Across materials, he performs acts of translation, of memory, archive, and observation, into forms that remain open and actively unresolved. Writing is inseparable from that practice. His book, Dispersed Events, gathers 15 years of essays moving across art, dance, fashion, film, and decorative arts with an associative intelligence. His writing sets aside stable categories, preferring to weave what Lynn Cook calls a wildly inscrutable web of lineages, where affiliations emerge not from fixed genealogy, but from lived attention. Whether writing about Lorraine O'Grady, Susan Cinciolo, or Reza Abdo, Mauss approaches art as something that happens between people, between disciplines, and between art history and the everyday. Throughout his work, the exhibition is rendered as a stage, the viewer cast within it. Histories are not presented, they're activated. What might have seemed marginal or decorative becomes central, and we ourselves are gently reoriented. It's a rare practice, at once sensuous and rigorous, that reminds us history isn't fixed, it's something to continually redraw. Please join me in welcoming Nick Mauss.
Thank you so much, Jay and Stella, for curating this, and Lola for your reading. I'm going to read a version of an essay structured as a series of episodes that was made as a kind of art history, where I was revisiting a group of artists by looking closely at the medium of costume as a carrier of certain social exchanges. And the more I worked on this, I wanted to expand the idea of costume to include the idea of the everyday that Jay just mentioned, which is very difficult to understand now, what that may have meant or what that means, as a way to think about our own lives as performers. So it's a piece of writing that I still have a lot of questions about, and I think it's going to be ongoing, but I don't know what form it will ultimately take, so I'm really happy. Thank you for listening today. The art of costume and personal appearance. Fugitive and often improvised in nature, costumes by artists are rarely accorded the prominence of painting or sculpture and tend to be shrugged off in the writing of history. As a medium of intimate collaborative exchange between artist, choreographer, and performer, stage costume is unsuited to the single author narratives inevitably coerced from even the most fluid forms of collective practice. Because they undermine the permanence or the illusion of art's permanence, these contingent works are assigned to a tertiary category, even by those who once made them for, and at times directly on, the performing body. But the prevalence of 20th century artists who exploded the limits of their way of working via the proscenium demands that costumes, masks, and props be afforded serious scrutiny, not as vestiges, but as objects of art's histories. The task of transforming historical accounts of dances into, quote, vividly remembered images, argued Abby Warburg, can only be accomplished, quote, by making the effort to see them in the context of the depictions of festive pageantry in the art of the period, an effort that has yet to be made either in a specific case study or in a more general work, end quote. So the following is a partial account of the exchanges, both on stage and off, among an intricate network of artists and dancers working in New York after World War II, who discovered in costume a means for expanding the notion of what a body and an artist could be. The painters, recalled the dancer and Merce Cunningham archivist David Vaughan, quote, were the most loyal audience for early concerts by Cunningham and Cage. But it was with Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns that they felt a closer kinship. Seeing Rauschenberg's all-white paintings in the summer of 1952 encouraged Cage to write his famous silent piece, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, end quote. Vaughan's recollection draws us directly into the early reciprocity between Cunningham, Cage, Rauschenberg, and Johns. But it also establishes the larger resonance between New York dancers and the painters of the 1950s. The poet Diane de Prima recalled the cultural landscape of mid-century New York as follows. She said, "The worlds overlapped in a million ways and places, the art world, the worlds of jazz, of modern classical music, of painting and poetry and dance, were all interconnected. There were endless interweavings. They happened slowly over several years, and they were the stronger for that slow growth." The inextricability of art from theater and dance was made concrete in the Living Theater, whose logo, as you can see, was made by Jean Cocteau, and whose third floor was occupied by Cunningham's dance studio. This is where vanguard plays were enacted by artists, dancers, and poets, including a 1952 production of Pablo Picasso's play, Desire Caught by the Tail, featuring the poets Frank O'Hara and John Ashbery, dressed in dog costumes, feigning copulation on stage. Against the backdrop of these interweavings, Cunningham emerged as the most ambitious inheritor of the fused legacies of modernist art and dance, galvanizing a distinct form of interdisciplinarity around his company via the Cagean framework that Carolyn Brown, the dancer, characterized as collaborative non-collaboration. Cunningham himself described it as bringing together three separate elements in time and space, the music, the dance, and the decor, allowing each one to remain independent. He was, however, not alone in calling on artists to design costumes and decors for his dances. This was a practice that was common in an era defined by an intense reciprocity among performers, painters, sculptors, and filmmakers who generated the images and after-images of what was termed new dance. Young choreographers including Paul Taylor, Eileen Pasloff, James Waring, Catherine Litz, and Alvin Ailey invited artists such as Klaas Oldenburg, Ellsworth Kelly, Remy Charlotte, Nicholas Chernovich to design their flyers, costumes, props, lighting, and backdrops, and in some cases worked with the same artists we now mainly associate with Cunningham, as you see on this flyer for the collective Dance Associates. Johns, for example, made costumes and props for James Waring, Marian Sarek, and Paul Taylor, while also collaborating with Rauschenberg on designs for Taylor and Cunningham. Eileen Pasloff recalled that the painter Fay Lansner, whose flyer you see here, made costumes for me, and there were other artists around my studio like Marc de Souvero, so we had amazing painters and sculptors all around us, end quote. Artist Alex Katz would go on to design costumes and sets for 16 dances by Paul Taylor, and emphasized the importance of this intermedial dynamic when he told me in a recent conversation, dancers and poets were more inspiring to me than painters. And here are two photographs by Minoru Nizuma taken at Yoko Ono's Chambers Street Loft series in 1960 and 61, showing Rauschenberg in conversation with Isamu Noguchi. Seeing these actually quite recently, I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps they were talking about their work for the stage, which really can't be untethered from their work as a whole. Quote, "That's why I like dance, music, theater," Rauschenberg would go on to say in 1977. "Because none of these things can exist as solo endeavors. Also, the best way to know people is to work with them, and that's a very sensitive form of intimacy," end quote. painted on the body. Cunningham was initiated into the art of costume during his studies at the Cornish School in Seattle, in Imaginary Landscape No. 1, choreographed by his teacher Bonnie Bird to a composition by the recently hired accompanist, John Cage. The 19-year-old Cunningham performed alongside Bird and two fellow students in what appears to be a constructivist ballet, danced by oversized black geometric shapes. Each performer's costume was simultaneously a prop and part of a changeable scenography composed of a trapezoid, a column, and two triangles, which were carried, hoisted, or grounded in a continual reconfiguration of the geometric syntax. Upon his move to New York in 1939, Cunningham continued to absorb the integral functions of costume and vanguard dance while performing under choreographer Martha Graham, who understood all too well the power of arresting dance images, realized in exchange with artists. Cunningham asked one of Graham's collaborators, the designer Charlotte Trowbridge, to devise a costume for his short solo totem ancestor. Trowbridge's striated design echoes her sinuous drawings of Graham in performance, merging the lines of movement, costume, and person into new glyph-like entities. For Root of an Unfocus, an early collaboration with Cage, Cunningham made his own costume, clearly indebted to Trowbridge's embodied sense of line, with the addition of a giant eye appliqued onto his back. This burgeoning collaborative and romantic relationship between Cunningham and Cage took the form of a triad, in which Cage's wife, the sculptor Xenia Kashevarov-Cage, was embroiled. Xenia Cage is an artist whose work has unfortunately almost been lost entirely. She worked in very ephemeral media beyond the collaborations with her husband, John Cage, on his concerts. She also created balsa wood and paper mobiles, which were exhibited at the important Surrealist Gallery of Julian Levy. This is one of the only existing works of hers I was able to find, a radical architectural proposal for cutting a slit in the Chrysler Building to allow for the uninterrupted passage of clouds. Xenia, too, was in close dialogue with dance, and in the year of her separation from John, she painted thorn-like nerves branching from the underarms of the dress in choreographer Jean Erdmann's Ophelia, set to a composition by Cage. And it's crucial here to acknowledge the entanglements with female collaborators, mentors, and romantic partners in the lives of a now canonical group of artists whose rise to prominence is all too often made to appear to have been incubated within a vacuum of male-to-male relationships. I'm indebted to Jill Johnston, via the artist Megan Francis Sullivan, as one of the only critics to resist the homosocial hagiography behind, quote, the fabulous foursome of Cage, Cunningham, Johns, and Rauschenberg, as they would come to be seen. And Johnston's work, especially, makes a bid for a more complex understanding of queerness that accounts for the emotional and material difficulty of its historical determination and the role played by women in queer forms of relation. By 1947, Cage and Cunningham were officially known as collaborators and discreetly as a couple, and had embarked on the dance Dromenon, for which Cunningham made the women's costumes, including headdresses fashioned from pine branches gathered by Cage on his mushroom forages. The painter Sonia Sekula, known to be an out lesbian, moved in across the hall from Cage's loft and became part of an extended network of artists, musicians, and dancers, and Cunningham's new collaborator. David Vaughan recalled that for Dromenon, Sekula painted the design directly onto the tights and leotard while Cunningham was wearing them. Scrolls, star forms, diamonds, and wedges of color skirmish and collide in Sekula's body-shaped painting, transforming Cunningham into an electrified harlequin and giving new meaning to the all-over abstract expressionism's conception of unbounded composition. Such a painted costume demanded extreme physical and emotional closeness, given that it would have taken Sekula several sittings to achieve full coverage. The costume remains as an index not only of dromenon, meaning the thing done in ancient Greek, but also of the unknowable conversations that transpired between Cunningham and Sekula, and most likely also Cage, as she touched every inch of Cunningham's body with color, a volumetric sensate canvas. David Vaughan's observation that, quote, a little of the design actually comes off onto Merce's body every time the costume is worn, is especially poignant considering that Cunningham wore the costume again in a new dance titled Solo, made 3 decades after Sekula painted it and 12 years after her suicide. Mix and match. While teaching at Black Mountain College during the summer session of 1948, Cage initiated a production of composer Eric Satie's lyric comedy, The Ruse of the Medusa, from 1913, which relied on the talents of both the college's faculty and students, with sets by the painters Elaine and Willem de Kooning and Buckminster Fuller in the main role. Cunningham danced the part of the costly mechanical monkey and was costumed in a cap that he had fashioned himself, a tasseled coat by the painting student Mary Uten, and an attenuated wire tail by the sculptor Richard Lippold. Additional special properties, quote unquote, for the production included a bell by Ruth Asawa and a telephone by Ray Johnson and Forrest Wright, among others. Costumes in this instance were made piecemeal by various talents, and participants could inhabit multiple simultaneous functions and roles. I can go on at length about the role of costuming at Black Mountain, but I'm going to zoom ahead and say that it was most imbricated, I think, in the social fabric of the college, as indicated by frequent pretexts to dress up and get together parties, drawing inspiration from North American traditions such as Halloween, holiday parades, and Beaux-Arts balls, mingled with the avant-garde sort of sophistication of Bauhaus costume soirees. Indeed, a popular culture of the costume that predates the advent of television as an entertainment medium also provided a backdrop for these parties, along with, I can only speculate, the more subversive tradition of drag balls. A series of color photographs by Josef Albers documents the homemade costumes worn by attendees of Black Mountain's 1940 Valentine's Day ball. Annie Albers is the spitting image of Francisco Goya's 1797 portrait of the Duchess of Alba, an unknown reveler whose face is obscured by a skin-tight knitted face mask and candy stripes, or a young woman with feathers glued to her eyelashes, donning an intricately coiffed wig made of an ordinary mop. On another occasion, Trude Guermont-Prez captured Rauschenberg preparing a Mardi Gras celebration, standing on the outdoor deck of the college where he was adjusting the ingenious four-legged costume of a centaur reed on the writer Ingeborg Lauterstein. The widespread significance of costuming as a liberatory creative mode and a medium of social transformation reappears in a series of collaged albums produced by Black Mountain artists. During the 1950s, Ray Johnson made 2 collaged storybooks premised on fictive costume parties populated by friends, idols, and uninvited guests. Assembled from images clipped out of magazines, newspapers, and books on dance and art, Johnson's albums dressed up his imaginary guests in various witty guises, such as a woman dressed as a painting from de Kooning's Woman series. Full of in-jokes and rife with camp, the albums are essentially costume parties for the mind, and notable for the way in which they render identity as fluid, queer, and inherently contradictory. The attendees map an extended network of Johnson's world of art, such as Shari, who arrived as a swan, referring to the Hungarian-born artist Shari Dines, who made large-scale frottages of New York City sidewalks, often with the assistance of young artists, including Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, and Johns' girlfriend, the performance artist Rachel Rosenthal. Equating a costume party and its unpredictable social and sartorial disharmony with a chance operation, Johnson presents a winking retort to John Cage's influential philosophy of composition. But in one of the party books, the merriment and fantasy of Johnson's speculative scenario is pierced by the repeat intrusion of Adolf Hitler as himself. And the book ends with, "The police broke up the party," alluding to the very real threat of police raids of gatherings under the increased stranglehold of Cold War homophobia. Johnson's collage books inspired another collaged flip book by the artist and Cunningham dancer Remy Charlotte around the themes of transformation and unfixed identity. Charlotte presented the book as a 3-way gift, likely in reciprocation for one of Ray's books, to Ray Johnson, his lover Richard Lippold, and the photographer and lighting designer Helen Balfour Morrison, who was involved in an intimate creative partnership with the choreographer Sybil Shearer. Lippold, the sculptor who made Cunningham's monkey tail, was also an editor of the journal Dance Observer during the 1940s and would have introduced Morrison and Shearer to his Black Mountain peers. Indeed, Shearer even choreographed a solo for Cunningham titled Scribble Scrabble, or A Woman's Picture of a Man's World during this time. The nature of this gift of the flipbook, not to one but to three recipients, also deserves attention, as it breaks with the commonly unilateral direction of a gift, thereby proposing another form of relationality and altering the gift economy altogether. Charlotte's book was made in the format of a mix-and-match children's book, akin to the surrealist game of Exquisite Corpse, with each of its pages sliced in three so that heads, torsos, and legs could be reconfigured to create new bodies. Its logic follows that of Cage and Cunningham's premise of separate coexistence, or what Jill Johnson described as, quote, the example in dance of putting things together or letting things go together that are not logically thought to have any business being together, end quote. Rather than a book to be read or looked at, Charlotte offered a social game that produced an endless parade of allegorical figures, whose multiplicity echoed the network of intimacies triangulating and refracting among its multiple players and their collaborators. The legs of a fin de siècle French revue dancer about to kick up into the air might connect to the torsos of three graces modeling the latest brassieres, which could in turn be topped by the head of ballet dancer and choreographer Václav Nijinsky in Afternoon of a Faun, as photographed by Baron de Meyer, or by actress Bette Davis's face, smiling beneath sunglasses and nonchalantly smoking a cigarette. The body of Merce Cunningham, captured mid-leap by the influential Black Mountain photographer Hazel Larson Archer, might wear the head of Georges Rouault's painting The Old King, a reference to Balanchine's neoclassical ballet, The Prodigal Son, for which Rouault had designed the sets and costumes. While its staggered array of socks from a catalog or the legs of a crucifix could serve as Cunningham's feet. Costumes for statues. During his stay in Rome in 1953, Rauschenberg staged a temporary installation of his recent sculptures in the gardens of the Villa Medici. The Fedici Personali were lightweight, portable, suspended objects made of natural materials and found objects, including rope, beads, branches, and round mirrors pried from compacts, animal hair. Perhaps inspired by Marcel Duchamp's Sculpture des Voyages and Alexander Calder's hanging mobiles, Rauschenberg's Fedici were assembled like talismanic proto-hippie jewelry and could be installed variably. Close study of the photographs documenting his intervention in the Mannerist gardens reveals a playful and social dimension to this display of the works Rauschenberg had made while traveling through Italy and Morocco with his lover Cy Twombly. One image, likely taken by Twombly, I don't have a very good one, captures Rauschenberg in the act of hanging a sculpture from the branches of a tree where it dangles down like a wind chime, among similar works whose long horsetail elements blow in the breeze. How long the Fedici were thus installed in the gardens, we cannot know, but until now this display has been read with a skewed focus on Rauschenberg's objects alone, without ascribing intention to their chosen context or to the performative implications of this outdoor exhibition, whose carefully photographed documentation suggests that the artists understood the work scenographically. It's likely that Twombly would have been the only intentional witness to this display of personal fetishes in a public park, aside from the many busts of historic figures arrayed along its paths, which were incorporated into the installation as if they were spectators, or even performers costumed in the young Rauschenberg suspended talismans. A bust of the ancient Roman poet Horace, for example, played a part in this drama, wearing one of the strange objects as a kind of inverted headdress. In Rauschenberg's photograph of the ancient poet in drag, a rope runs across his cranium, suspending a horizontal branch just beneath the chin, from which hangs a symmetrical arrangement of twine-wrapped twigs, pebbles strung on wire, compact mirrors, and an animal's mane. Given Twombly's engagement with Horace's poetry and its invocations of same-sex desire, one could venture that Twombly had helped Rauschenberg cast this bust from among the hundreds of literary and military notables arrayed along the Pincio terraces, generally frequented by tourists and perhaps just as often by men cruising for sex. When they returned to New York, and in parallel to their pursuit of public recognition as gallery artists, Twombly and Rauschenberg reconnected with their Black Mountain peers. Twombly, who historically has not been associated with performance, even contributed to an evening of dances by the choreographer James Waring. You can see the name, it's very small in this list, in 1957, which included a film projected onto the audience by Nicola Cernovich and designs by Ray Johnson and the abstract expressionist painter Helen Frankenthaler. Despite the absence of any documentation of Twombly's designs for the evening, the knowledge of his participation in this multi-authored, time-based event alters the overly hermetic reading of his work. It also shines a new light on the highly staged series of photographs taken by Rauschenberg of Twombly, posing amid his sculptures and paintings in the Fulton Street studio they shared. Frontally arrayed toward the camera as if they were dance decor or a window display. During his 1957 return visit to Rome, Twombly posed for a photograph by another close friend, the artist Elizabeth Betty Stokes, in which he appears like an ancient Roman bust. His hair in a Caesar cut and a plain sheet thrown over his shoulder to emulate a toga, the artist momentarily transcends the improvised costume and embodies his own fantasy of antiquity. Rauschenberg would go on to become one of the most prolific and consequential designers for dance since Noguchi, Picasso, Goncharova, but much of this work could be seen as originating in non-formalized improvisatory presentations, such as the outdoor presentation of the Fetici in the garden in Rome, or even earlier performances at Black Mountain College. Indeed, the headpieces Rauschenberg created for Cunningham's Nocturnes in 1956 bear an uncanny resemblance to those he spontaneously styled onto the Roman busts 5 years earlier. Made of rope, wire, wool, and mirror, with the addition of diaphanous veils, the Nocturnes' headpieces lend an enigmatic, out-of-time, ceremonial atmosphere to Cunningham's dance. The incorporation of mirrors in these costumes and in Rauschenberg's work is prefigured by the use of compact mirrors in the Fetici, but also in costumes dating as far back as 1949, when he conceived a dance as a birthday surprise for his wife, the artist Susan Weil, a fellow student at Black Mountain College. The performance of this birthday dance, Ingrid Lauterstein recalled, took place to words and music composed by Rauschenberg, and then Lauterstein kind of made up the dance. And these were the costumes for the dance. Nearly a decade later, Rauschenberg revived the costumes he had made for Weil's birthday surprise in Paul Taylor's 3 Epitaphs. These mirror-spangled bodysuits, reminiscent of costumes that a choreographer like Alvin Nicolai or artist Lee Bowery might have made. Or it's kind of, I lost my thread, but I'm trying to go backwards and forwards to this recursive interplay between Rauschenberg's dance costumes and his other works, especially with regard to his interest in thinking about trace and index, such as in this drawing made in 1954, Lawn Combed, and the poster he made for Paul Taylor in 1958, and then the near identical photograph he made for Cunningham in 1963. Then there's his first collaboration with John Cage, Automobile Tire Print, which reappears in the costumes for Taylor's dance Tracer, featuring leotards marked with tire tracks. Similarly, Rauschenberg's costumes for Paul Taylor's Jack and the Beanstalk, an unknown dance, were, as the choreographer described, an invocation of the artist's recent meditation on authorship, his erased de Kooning drawing of 1953. Taylor wrote, "Bob did the costumes and props, which included a self-illuminating golden egg and a beanstalk that was merely a long string held up by a gas-filled balloon. It was never performed again, and its transitoriness was celebrated by a small ritual which Bob and I conducted. Taking the beanstalk and its balloons out into the alley behind the theater, we released them and watched them disappear into the sky. Isn't it just great the way dances are so easy to erase?" said Bob, and I wholeheartedly agreed. We were not the least interested in leaving monuments to the future. In fact, we saw a kind of glamour in impermanence. Animals in cages. A curious sketch by Rauschenberg of a costume intended for Paul Taylor's Images and Reflections gives a sense of how the artist's combines co-emerged with his work for the stage via his penchant for including animals in both, taxidermied animals in the combines and live animals on stage. The drawing depicts a dancer clad, and this is a drawing that was like literally hidden in the archives of the Paul Taylor company. The drawing depicts a dancer clad in a white leotard, sitting Seiza style on a simple wheeled contraption, hunched forward to accommodate a lamb that rests placidly on their back. To complicate matters for the dancer, they wear a headdress of cloth that hangs over each ear, possibly limiting peripheral vision, while balancing a book on top of their head. Thus inhibited in their range of motion and confined to an awkward bodily posture, the dancer would be obliged to propel themselves and their animal passenger around the stage using only their arms. This conundrum most readily conjures the presence of the stuffed long-haired Angora goat wearing a car tire in the celebrated Combine monogram, which Rauschenberg was in the process of completing while he was working on this dance, Images and Reflections. And although the costume pairing lamb and human performers was never realized, Rauschenberg found other ways to incorporate animals into subsequent dances, particularly those he started orchestrating for himself in the mid-1960s. And he said about this presence, quote, "The presence of any kind of animal other than people draws one's attention to the fact that people are simply a different kind of creature," end quote. 30 turtles with flashlights taped to their shells moved across the stage in spring training, 1965, and doves fluttered about inside the spectacular cage-like costume Rauschenberg devised for dancer Deborah Hay in his Map Room 2 that same year. In 1966, Rauschenberg dressed his lover, Steve Paxton, in a cage for his part in the dance Linoleum. Not so much a costume as a defiance of what a costume can be, Paxton's disposition in Linoleum restricted him to a bed on wheels enclosed by a tunnel of wire mesh. Lying prone on his stomach while live chickens pecked between his legs, the dancer navigated the stage floor by pushing himself along with his arms, listlessly eating fried chicken wings scattered on his pillow. Paxton's bed/cage shares elements of Rauschenberg's unrealized costume for Taylor, forcing the dancer to give up verticality, undermining virtuosic corporeality, and severely restricting movement to the point of disability. One could read the function of the recurrent costume as cage as a subliminal echo of John Cage's continued influence, or as a barbed homage, not unlike Walter de Maria's 1961 statue of John Cage, implying that the composer's philosophy had become more dogmatic than emancipatory. De Maria recalled that the work was, quote, partly a recognition of the fact that Cage may have been caging a lot of people. Wholly disembodied, his statue presents no figure and no pedestal. Instead, the composer's likeness has been reduced to a condition of solitary confinement. And now I'm coming to the end. The theater of the self. The composer Morton Feldman, who lived in the same building as Cage and Sekula, observed that, quote, New York had its established homosexual community in terms of being a metropolis, and then the world of dance and so forth and so on, end quote. Feldman's recognition of the homosexual community as proximate with the world of dance is key to understanding the fever pitch of intermedial stage collaborations that flourished in post-war New York, despite a highly homophobic culture and ideological state apparatus. The unprescribed arena of new dance offered not only a space in which queer artists could explore and dissolve the limits of their own work, but also a means to project their condition of difference. However, an apparent contradiction seems to emerge when considering the costumes made by artists for the stage and the costumes they chose for their own day-to-day role play. Rachel Rosenthal described, quote, two aspects of Rauschenberg. One aspect is what I call the theatrical, where he's wearing a mask. His hair is done, his costume is beautiful. He has the stream of consciousness, which is poetic and very mysterious also. Then he is the man who goes home and figures things out. When Rauschenberg went home, Rosenthal pointed out, he had on a suit, he had a tie, his suit was always impeccable, beautiful colors, elegance personified. She elaborated. He dressed like a dandy, he was beautifully put together. On the other hand, his studio was a mess. He worked in this kind of gritty, dirty, detritus, debris of work, his work, garbage thrown out, things found, and everything like that. So there was this interesting double life in a way that he was leading, end quote. The outward conformity of the suit and tie was a directly anti-bohemian stance, as much as it can be understood as a kind of front stage costume, to use a term from sociologist Irving Goffman's 1963 book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, in which he set out to, quote, consider the way in which the individual in ordinary work situations presents himself and his activity to others, the ways in which he guides and controls the impression they form of him, and the kinds of things he may and may not do while sustaining his performance before them, end quote. Even if, as Feldman observed, there was a very pervasive homosexual world in New York in the 50s, he also noted an anti-homosexual bias that was not overt. In the face of such covert social violence, Feldman maintained, there's always in any environment a kind of hard hat aspect. Anti-expressive and neutral, the suit, it would seem, was one aspect of the hard hat required of a queer artist who wanted official recognition, as seen in a 1959 portrait of Johns posing beside his target with 4 faces. Cage also resorted to the uniform of a suit, though the painter Philip Guston was not convinced, reading his social demeanor as a nightclub act. But in performing his composition Water Walk for solo television performer on the game show I've Got a Secret in 1960, Cage's suit was the red herring that permitted his demonstration of anarchy amid household fixtures and appliances. His delivery and costume in Water Walk were so captivatingly deadpan that Federico Fellini offered the composer a part in La Dolce Vita, which he declined. Just a few years earlier, Rauschenberg and Johns radically departed from the inventive costumes they had previously fashioned for Taylor. Instead, sending him out onto the stage in a ready-made suit that echoed the costume worn by Gregory Peck as the archetypal Cold War conformist in The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, just as much as it resembled the professional guise the artists themselves affected. Here you see the invitation to 7 new dances performed by Paul Taylor in 1957. In another promotional photograph taken by Rauschenberg, the young Taylor presents himself in this costume, a dark suit, polished dress shoes, pressed shirt and tie, hugging his arms in a gesture of vulnerability that disturbs his otherwise implacable veneer. The choice of this costume seems to self-consciously address the performance of normativity, which assumes heteronormativity in the hollowness of passing. The artist Jeffrey Hendricks recalled a passage from 7 New Dances with a soundtrack chosen by Rauschenberg of an automated telephone time of day service. Quote, at the tone, the time will be 11:58 and 50 seconds, bong. At the tone, the time will be 11:59 exactly, bong, and so forth. For exactly 8 minutes, Taylor, dressed in a suit, moved through a progression of simple body movements. This was followed by a dance of comparable stillness, duet, danced to Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds. 2 additional witnesses of the dance, Robert Whitman and David Gordon, claimed that its audacity exceeded Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Though they did not elaborate, their comment suggests that Taylor's dance multiplied the implications of Cage's composition. If the absence of music could reveal a previously ignored body of sound, then the absence of dance could draw attention to a whole vocabulary of involuntary gestures. And a costume that was not a costume at all, but a mirror, would in Johns's words declare, quote, that the boundary of a body is neither a part of the enclosed body nor a part of the surrounding atmosphere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick and Lola. Please join us next week. We have Forrest Gander and Jennifer Scarpatone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.